in this group for the session. So Mette Jørgensen from Eco-Effective Strategies. Come on up, Mette. You're going to talk to us today about, about offshore wind decommissioning and what lies there for us. So, over to you.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to get right. Mette Jørgensen. I'm leading, I think that's a good to start with. I'm leading a coalition in the Netherlands at the moment, trying to facilitate nature-friendly decommissioning for both offshore wind and oil and gas platforms. It's a coalition of 2 green NGOs at the Dutch version of the North Sea Transition Authority, the next step, which is really focused only on decommissioning of oil and gas infrastructure. The Wind Association, the Oil and Gas Association, the TENET, which is the TSO in the Netherlands, and EBN, which is a Dutch state participant in all oil and gas activities. So that's what we are working on. One of the focus topics, indeed, is decommissioning of offshore wind farms. And the challenge, I think, in there is really one that we've talked a lot about, figuring out how we can, is it really clean seabed? Is that the best for nature? Or can we do something more to make sure that wind farms help to restore nature? Yesterday we talked a lot about OSPAR decision 98.3. I think it's good to start with the good news. That OSPAR 98.3 is not valid for offshore wind. So currently there is no regulations at OSPAR level for decommissioning of offshore wind and other renewables. It's a long story why that's the case, but I'll skip that one. But it's good to realize that OSPAR also themselves, they have realized that this is the case, and they actually just started up a process which is planned to take decisions in 2027. I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to take longer, but that's the plan at the moment. So we still really have an opportunity to make sure that at the OSPAR level we do make the right decision this time, and not something that is being built too much on the assumption that offshore wind decommissioning is the same as oil and gas, and that we should just stick to our clean seabed principles, and because that's what you see at national regulations level at the moment. Ever more countries are moving towards a clean seabed principle, and I think that is concerning for when it comes to offshore wind. Because offshore wind decommissioning is not the same as oil and gas decommissioning. It's huge. It's really, I think Richard Stark sometimes called it oil and gas decommissioning on steroids, and I think that's a correct description. First of all, we are going to construct these huge amounts of the wind farms that we also, many people showed that yesterday. The North Sea Energy Corporation have an ambition of 260 gigawatts of offshore wind in 2050, which means that will be some 17,000, possibly even more, 20,000 offshore wind turbines, and they will all have to be decommissioned at some point. So that's something really to think about, that all these little squares that we saw people showing yesterday, they will have to be decommissioned at some point, and that's a lot more in terms of area than the current oil and gas platforms. At the same time, renewables is different because yes, you do get a permit for 20 to 40 years at the moment, but the wind is not going to stop. It's renewable, so that means that the wind is going to stay there where the offshore wind farms are located. So in principle, you would be able to continue producing energy from that area in perpetuity. And the fact that we say that one offshore wind farm is only for 40 years is really something that we decide on. So it really starts, all of it starts very much at the planning stage. How are we thinking about offshore wind farms, and how do we see them develop on the long term in the North Sea that we want to see? So far, there's hardly any experience with offshore wind decommissioning. I think that's very important also to realize. A few small wind farms that have been removed in Denmark, Sweden, I think also one in Belgium, but really close to the coast, small ones. And you see with one study being done on a Belgian wind farm, even with a small one of 3 megawatt turbines, 45 of them, you have a total mass of materials of almost 250,000 tons, of which the scar protection layer is 80%. So that's really a different story than oil and gas again. I'll do this one very briefly because I think we talked about that all the time today and yesterday. The rollout of offshore wind is going to fundamentally change our ecosystem. We don't know exactly whether that's for good or bad, and it depends on which species we're looking at, but it's going to change it. And the big question is, can we assume that it will change back to a good situation if we remove everything over 40, 50, 100, whatever years? One of the things that is certainly clear is that the disturbance of the nature is going to be larger when you remove a lot of things. A German study, they have made a series study, I think, of all the impacts of different versions of decommissioning. Where you see that, the versions, the partial removal ones where the scarring protection, as at least is left on site, are definitely the ones with the lowest impact. Whereas the one, I think it's, the complete removal one, and certainly the ones also on the, where really everything is taken out, they are a lot more impactful. So we'll get, because of the fact that also wind farms will be repowered, they will continue, we'll get a continuous process of disturbance all the time and creating new ecosystems again from the start. So I think what we should try to aim for when we want to influence OSPAR is really make sure we get opportunities for a case-by-case approach, where we start choosing areas where hard substrate is something that we want, and we also plan for the wind farms to be in those areas. In those ones, then we can also indeed invest really in native positive measures in those areas, and then also leave those ones in place as long as possible. We need to design for maximum lifetime and reuse of the infrastructure, especially scar protection layer, for instance, but also the foundations when we repower wind farms. And we need to develop standardized procedures for determining which ecological values we would like to conserve on the long term. During the operations phase, monitoring indeed is key, and then making good use, of course, of the standard procedures for how do we consider ecological value, assessing societal costs and benefits towards the end of life. I think that's an important one, because now we are often discussing also decommissioning on the basis of the assumption that, for instance, fishermen that have not been fishing there for the whole period of a wind farm operations will get back after 50 years and go and fish there again. And I don't know whether that's a realistic assumption. Or we do the decommissioning decisions on the basis that we should always be ready for any other new use that we don't know what exactly it will be, and it shouldn't be hindering for that. So that's, something really to consider during the process, when you also know what actually the value of the wind farm, how that's going to develop. And then make clear long-term arrangements on liability and responsibility and management of whatever potentially stays in place. And when I say long-term, I think personally that that's probably not something that should be left to the operators, as it is now in the UK for the oil and gas sector, but should be taken care of either by a fund or by the state as such. Then, in the decommissioning phase, remove and recycle as much as possible of everything that is worth recycling, that really has a recycling potential. Take mitigation steps to preserve the ecological values, also in the terms of techniques, so really develop techniques that disturb the seabed as little as possible, and create as little as possible noise and that kind of all the disturbance, and then in the end, and then we get probably to the OECMs, legally protect the areas from disturbing activities if we decide that we want to conserve the ecological values that have been developed. And that was it, so thank you. And